Please don't feel alone. The north of England has a lot of people living with diabetes of all kinds, and please know that there's lots you can do and we can do together. Yeah, so my name's Clare Howarth, and I'm head of the North of England regional team here at Diabetes UK. And Diabetes UK is the largest charity in the UK, supporting people living with, at risk of, or working within diabetes. And so my job is very much about that. It's to make sure there's lots of preventative programs and those things that are given out on a UK or an England-wide footprint, to make sure I work with partners so that they're implemented to a gold standard across the north of England, to make sure we support our brilliant healthcare professionals who work within all the various types of diabetes and diabetes prevention, and massively to make sure we support those living with or at risk of or loving someone living with diabetes. Lots and lots of myths though. You see myths all the time about diabetes, and they can be so absolutely soul destroying for people living with or at risk of diabetes or working within as well. So people may assume if somebody's eating a nice piece of cake, or if somebody's eating, I don't know, a nice jack and potato, that sweet treats or carbs are the reason people may be living with diabetes. That is a myth, absolute myth. That's not true. People may assume for people living with type 1 diabetes that tech does it all for us now. That's not true. Tech helps, but it doesn't do it for us all. There's so much people might believe that people have to be overweight to have diabetes. I've lived with type 1 diabetes for much of my life, and sometimes people say, I don't look like I live with diabetes. What? What does that mean? So there are so many different types of stigma that impact people living with diabetes, whether you're young or whether you're old, and they can, these kinds of stigmas can go quite deep for people, can't they? So on our North of England Facebook just a few months ago, somebody had asked a question like you've just asked me, really. What kinds of stigma have you experienced? And somebody was talking about being in a restaurant, out in a restaurant somewhere in Manchester, and a little child was going to do their insulin injection, and somebody said, would you not prefer to go and do that in the toilet? No, we don't want to go and do it in the toilet. Would you like to go and eat your dinner in the toilet? Probably not. So again, it's those kinds of things, and they can start to become so upsetting for people that perhaps going out for dinner or going to catch a show, or that inner voice that we all have, can become really damaged by other people's misbeliefs about diabetes. No, I think being open and head on does always work. I think you're right. I think it's being open and head on without those misinformed judgments or assumptions. So, for example, quite often people living with diabetes, people will say, can you eat that? So rather than can you eat that, are you enjoying that? Is that okay? Treat people normally. Their food, while it's a big important part of life with diabetes, people living with diabetes know what food choices to make for them, so they don't need someone else, for example, to make that judgment. But you're quite right, head on with openness and kindness. You can very rarely go wrong, can't you? So again, sometimes people will self-blame that they've got diabetes, and sometimes that's the message we hear across national media, isn't it? So again, reminding people it's not your fault. How are you doing with your diabetes? It's their diabetes, it's their journey. A big part of that, we know so many people are living with diabetes. Obviously, a big part is it can come into the workplace as well. So again, if you happen to work with someone who happens to be living with diabetes, be their big support champion at work, be a diabetes champion. Have you got everything you need at work? Are our policies okay for you to be able to attend your diabetes health checks? It's those kinds of things. So I actually think you're right. I think being open and being head on is fine. But it's about doing that without some of the judgments that we pick up along the way, right? So we've got some brilliant employers. So at some point this week, we're with Merseyside and possibly Greater Manchester Police. because they're saying, you know, we want to do more to help staff working across the police force who are living with diabetes or who are at risk of. What can we do to make, you know, shifts are hard? What can we do to make sure shift patterns are okay? What can we do with our canteen areas? What can we do with our policies? How can we make sure our staff have got enough time to go and get the health checks? Because all people with diabetes really need to get health checks at least once a year. And sometimes we need to go onto education programs and things like that as well. So yeah, you get it a lot. Also, you know, if you're on a 0-hour contract and an employer with a 0-hour contract, could you do more to make sure that people living with diabetes or any long-term condition can have paid time off to go to their appointments? But yeah, we get it from schools as well. Of course, we get young people when they're transitioning from primary to secondary, from nursery to primary, from secondary up to college, college to university or the workplace. Again, when you live with diabetes, it kind of becomes your responsibility to advocate and fix things. And so we deal with that a lot and we get a lot of experiences. I would say in the main, most people don't mean to cause offence and they don't mean to be so judgmental, but sometimes it happens because that's the narrative out there. Yeah, of course. So the kinds of things we offer is we offer volunteering opportunities. So if anybody watching or listening would like to come and volunteer for us, we would absolutely love that. And we will put you through all the training and you'll be very supported. We also have brilliant support groups. So people living with diabetes or loving someone living with diabetes or parents of children living with diabetes. And we've got some brilliant ones in and around Manchester. So if somebody was getting a new diagnosis of any kinds of diabetes, you could go onto our website and you could just look up support groups, and we have a little postcode finder. You can put your postcode in and it'll tell you where your nearest support group is. And I can tell you we've got some fantastic ones in Manchester. We've got our Stockport tadpoles for children living with type 1 diabetes, and they've been going for over 30 years since one of the little children, Ash, was diagnosed with type 1, and he is now in his 30s and still comes along to the group and still volunteers. And then we've got some fantastic volunteers in and around Manchester who would also, if people wanted a bit of one-to-one support with our community champs and volunteers, we would do that. And of course, if that's not your thing, and that's quite okay if it's not, we also have our helpline, so people can call the helpline. I'll have a look for that number now because I can't remember off the top of my head. But people can call our helpline and you'll be able to speak to a helpline advisor who can give you lots of individual advice and support. On our website, there's lots and lots of stuff you can find, including our learning zone, which is fantastic. That's a place to learn about your diabetes, whatever kind it is you're living with, in a time and a place that suits you. So you can do it from bed in the evening, you can do it in the morning if you're an early riser, you can do it on your phone, on your laptop, and that's great, our learning zone. It just gives you the chance to really learn about things. And then the other thing we do is, as a charity, we're very big into our research. So ultimately, we want to find a cure for diabetes, all kinds of diabetes. So we have a big research department. We're always looking for people to either help us raise funds for research or to be part of research, to help us decide what research we should do. So again, all that information is on our website. And then for those people in Manchester, we do have our own North of England Facebook group. So if you go onto Facebook and look for Diabetes UK, your friends in the North, you can go on there. And I am always on there, always moderating it, always checking, you can ask any questions. And if myself or one of the team don't answer you, one of the other peer supporters on there will do. Well, please don't feel alone, you know, but it's easier to say that than to not feel alone. So, you know, the North of England has a lot of people living with diabetes of all kinds, and the UK does. It's one of the fastest growing conditions out there. So please know that you're not alone. Please know that there's lots you can do and we can do together to help you feel better and feel in control of what's going on. Because I think a lot of people tell me, especially when they're first diagnosed, there's either too much information or no information, and we don't seem to get really good support on diagnosis quite right. So we can do that. And if you've been diagnosed for a few years, but just think, I don't know, I just feel a little bit lost with it all because things change. Then we're here for you, and we've got lots of other people, and you can find your own tribe and feel your own vibe over here with us. So please don't feel alone. And the biggest message I would like to give is diabetes is nobody's fault. If it was one person's fault, if it was one thing we all did, then look, we could easily cure it, but it isn't. It's a multi-layered, very complex condition. It impacts people differently. Our gender, our ethnicity, or everything about us is how diabetes will touch us. It's very individual, but it is certainly nobody's fault. As I say, we don't want anyone living in Greater Manchester to feel alone. So if we can be there and help even one person, then it's worth it.